Welcome back to Standing Apart. I'm Nigel Ridpath. Today's episode is a little different in format, somewhere between a solo episode and a guest interview. I've been in conversation with Dr. James Walsh, a US Air Force veteran, retired Department of Defense civilian, and author of a new book called You're a Leader, Now What? Rather than running the interview straight, I want to use James's perspective, and particularly his military lens, to look at a couple of topics that I think are genuinely underserved in most leadership conversations. Most books and courses on leadership give you the frameworks. What they're less good at is actually telling you what you need to do when things get uncomfortable, when someone on your team isn't pulling their weight, when two people in the room fundamentally disagree, or when the situation demands something your natural style isn't wired for. We've also got the 1 minute rant. Something has been getting on my nerves, and I suspect it's been getting on yours too. And a superhero of the week that I think will resonate with anyone who believes that genuinely difficult problems occasionally require genuinely courageous leadership. But before we get into the main topic, it's time to let off a little steam. It's time for my 1 minute rant. In the game of poker, a tell is an unconscious habit that gives away your hand. In Casino Royale, Le Chiffre's was a bleeding eye. Not ideal, but at least he tried to hide it. AI-generated content doesn't even bother. I've been watching the tells evolve with a kind of horrified fascination. First, it was the M-dash epidemic, every sentence getting a dramatic pause, whether it needed one or not. Then delve. Nobody said delve before 2023. Then the 5-bullet listicle with a rhetorical question at the end. Then unpack. Then the 1-sentence paragraph for emphasis, like this. Then here's the thing. Then let that sink in. Then posting a single word, bold, followed by 3 lines of supposed wisdom. And now we've arrived at the it's not X, it's Y construction, deployed 17 times per post. It's not insight, it's a template. I'll stop there because Alanis Morissette deserves a day off. But seriously, AI was supposed to help people sound more human. It makes them all sound identical, which, as it happens, is the opposite of standing apart. Right, rant over. On with the show. James Walsh spent the better part of 50 years in and around the United States Air Force. Enlisted, then officer, then as a Department of Defense civilian, latterly at the Pentagon. He now teaches leadership and management at Park University and has distilled his experience into You're a Leader, Now What? Out from Business Expert Press in August 2026. What I find most useful about James' perspective is that it comes from an environment where leadership isn't theoretical. In the military, the consequences of getting it wrong are considerably higher than a missed quarterly target. And yet, as you'll hear, the principles he's developed about trust, about conflict, about adapting your style, translate directly into the civilian workplace, which is the whole point. So let's get into it. Ask most managers how they handle conflict, and you'll get one of 2 answers. Either they'll tell you that they address it head-on, which usually means they come out swinging and wonder why things get worse. Or they'll tell you they prefer to let things resolve naturally, which is often code for hoping the problem goes away on its own. Neither of those is a strategy, and in my experience, the leaders who handle conflict well are the ones who've done something that most people haven't. They've thought about it in advance. They've decided what kind of conflict they're looking at before they decide what to do about it, because not all conflict is the same. This is the distinction I think matters most, and it's one James makes clear in his book and in our conversation.
Conflict management essentially can be a constructive or destructive conflict you're dealing with. As the leader, I always used to say, and still say it, that all you have to do is show up and you're in the middle of something.
Mm.
and they're coming to you for something, and there's some type of a conflict going on. It can be a difference of opinion, which is constructive. If I see people attacking each other and calling each other a bunch of names and I jump in, that's destructive.
That distinction, constructive versus destructive, sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but in the moment when you walk into a room and the temperature is already up, most leaders react rather than assess. They either jump in too early and escalate it, or they stay out too long and let it fester. The tell for me is always whether the disagreement is about the work or about the person. If two people are arguing about the best way to approach a client, that's not a problem. That's your team functioning. If one person is undermining another or simply absent from the effort entirely, that's a different conversation. James gives a very practical illustration of the second type, drawn from his classroom, but it maps directly onto any team environment.
I'll give you an example of someone that's not participating in a group in class, and then I let the group know when they talk to me about it. I says, "Well, you guys have a choice. You can formally come to me, which it seems like you are, and then I can join the group and I can go around and I say, 'How's it going?' Everybody's doing their part, and I get to the person that's not doing anything,
Mm.
and then I'll say, 'Well, looks like you're not participating a lot, and that's okay. You can have to do the project anyway to pass the course, so you can do a separate project for me, or you can participate in the group. Your choice.' You know? So that's one approach to it, and sometimes the group will just carry them. And I caution them against that, because they don't wanna, they wanna be a good guy, and they don't wanna, tell on their fellow student and stuff
Yeah,
like that. I said,
yeah,
"Well, just picture yourself out in the workforce, and you have a workmate that you're very good friends with, and he or she's not doing their load, and you have to pick it up, and they're still collecting their salary.
yeah.
Are you okay with that?"
I like that framing because it takes the emotional charge out of it. You're not accusing anyone of anything, you're simply naming the situation and asking what the person wants to do about it. That's a transferable technique. There's a related question that I think trips up a lot of leaders, particularly newer ones. When do you step in and when do you let the conflict run? Because there's a version of this where your instinct to fix things actually makes things worse. My own view, and this is something I've come to through watching lots of leaders operate over the years, is that the intervention threshold should be lower than most people think, but the intervention itself should be lighter than most people expect. The best leaders are there to reframe. What that looks like in practice is reminding people of what they're actually there to do, not taking sides, not delivering a verdict, just directing the energy back towards the shared objective. The military, interestingly, has a very clean version of this built into its culture, and James's experience of applying a collaborative style within a fundamentally directive institution gave him an unusual perspective on exactly when each mode is appropriate.
I talk about a scenario in the book where the first time that I had to administer discipline, but I was a lieutenant just made captain. I was a junior officer.
Mm,
And the first time I did it, I had a conversation. They reported to me formally and all that, and I had a senior NCO in the room as well. And then I had a conversation like we're having right now.
yeah,
Okay, this is what I see. This is what happened. Let me hear your side of the story. You
yeah,
know, and then he ended up getting a lot of punishment. And he left. And then the senior NCO said, "Lieutenant," I was lieutenant at the time, says, "This was the first time you've ever done this, right?" And I says, "Well, as a matter of fact, it was. Yeah."
mm,
And he says, "Well, you should have made this guy feel like he was like 3 inches tall. You should have come down on him like the hurricane and all that, and then kicked his, out the door." I said, "Well, uh, that's your perspective and that's your leadership style, and I respect that. But tell me the result. What was the result of this meeting here?" He says, "Well, the guy had severe punishment. He's got to do all this stuff. He got demoted and all that."
Yeah.
And I said, well, my leadership style is different from yours, and I respect that. You may have not used the same style in my place, but I'm comfortable using this style because I like to treat people as a human, and I like to make sure I fully understand their side of the story before I make a decision on what's going to happen to them. I remember a cousin of mine that came over to Greece, and I went to the gate and talked to the security policeman and said, "Hey, do you know Captain Walsh?" And she said, "Yeah, we know Captain Walsh. He's our commander." He says, "But he's tough, but he's fair, and
Yeah.
I make a fair judgment." And I told him, I says, "You know, I can live with that. I appreciate that perspective because they may never tell me that."
That phrase, tough but fair, is worth pondering for a moment, because what it actually describes is consistency. People need to know that whatever the outcome, the process was honest and they were heard. That's what earns trust, and trust is what makes everything else possible. This brings me to what I think is the deepest skill underneath all of this. Not just handling conflict well, but knowing which version of yourself the situation is calling for. Situational leadership isn't a new idea. It's been a framework in management thinking for decades, and both James and I have written about it. My take on it, which I explore in The Time Traveler's Guide to Management, is that the leaders who endure, the ones who build something that outlasts them, are the ones who read the room accurately and adapt rather than defaulting to whatever style got them the job in the first place. And here's the red flag I've started using when I'm assessing leaders. If you ask somebody what their leadership style is and they give you a single answer without hesitation, be cautious. The question isn't designed to have one answer. Any style applied rigidly, regardless of the situation, will eventually cause damage. James makes this point in the context of the military, which is instructive precisely because the military is so associated with one particular style.
That's true. Everyone has a natural leadership style, and we used to do these exercises in class. We would evaluate the exercises afterwards and say, "Oh, wow, your natural style is directive."
Yeah.
What I say, my way or the highway.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with that. But you have to recognize the limitations to that, and like you said earlier, Nigel, that's what you need in combat.
Yeah.
But the engineers working together, collaborating, like the example I gave, where you throw it over the wall, you're not in combat there. You could be a little bit more collaborative. People can adjust and change their leadership style. It may not be as easy for them, if you're naturally directive all the time, to be as collaborative and participative as what is my natural leadership style. In 4 years as a commander, I can count on one hand where the times I've had to give an order, because people know you're the boss. You
Yeah.
don't have to flaunt it, in my opinion. If I give a suggestion, which is really an order, they understand,
Mm.
but I can say it in a way that conversational, like we're talking right now, and they walk out of the office and say, "Yeah, we got to do certain things."
The evolution of military culture itself is actually a useful illustration here. James describes it as moving through 3 phases over his career, and the direction of travel is striking.
When I first went in the military, the organization was jump and how high. The
Mm.
response was how high. Then it evolved into jump and why do we have to jump?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Today it's jump and we want to participate in the jump. In other
Yeah.
words, we want to know more facts and participate in the jump.
That trajectory from pure compliance to earned participation is where most organizations are trying to get to. The military got there through necessity. The civilian workplace is getting there through generational shift and, frankly, through the labor market. People have options and they vote with their feet. And the leaders who understand that adaptive leadership is critical are the ones building teams that actually perform. James's book, You're a Leader, Now What?, is aimed primarily at first-time and emerging leaders, people who've just stepped into a role and are working out how to make it real. If that's where you are, or if you manage people who are in that position, it's a practical and honest guide. I'll put a link in the show notes. The broader point I'll leave you with is this. Most leadership development focuses on what to do when things are going well. The real test and the real differentiator between good leaders and average ones is what you do when things aren't. When the conflict is sitting in the room and everyone's waiting to see what you'll do about it. When your natural style is wrong for the moment. When you have to be tough and fair at the same time, and those two things feel like they're pulling in opposite directions. That's the work. And it's learnable. That's the one thing James and I agree on completely. And finally, for this episode, it's time for Superhero of the Week. My superhero of the week is Andy Burnham, and I should say up front, he's not from my political tribe, but this one transcends party lines, which is rather the point. For listeners outside the UK and those who don't pay too much attention to politics, a bit of context. Social care, the system that supports elderly and disabled people with daily living, residential care, home visits and so on, is means tested in the UK. Unlike the NHS, which is free at the point of use, if you have assets above a fairly modest threshold, you pay for your own care. In practice, people who've worked hard, saved carefully and done everything right can watch their life savings disappear into care home fees before the state steps in. It's been described in some quarters as a dementia tax on the responsible. Every major party has promised to fix it for the better part of 20 years. The Dilnot Commission reported in 2011 with clear costed recommendations. Shelved. Green papers, white papers, bold conference speeches, and then quietly the whole thing gets kicked to the next parliament. There are currently around 5 million unpaid carers in the UK, mostly family members, filling the gap the system won't. Burnham has history on this. He was Health Secretary in 2009, tried to introduce a national care service and watched it get torpedoed. As Mayor of Greater Manchester, he built one of the most serious attempts in the UK to integrate health and social care regionally. He's not new to this brief, he's actually been living it for 15 years. And now, as our new Prime Minister, he's convened an all-party commission. That's what earns him this week's cape. Here's why this is genuinely standing apart. In politics, the incentive structure almost always pushes against collaboration. If you bring your opponents into the tent and it works, they share the credit. If it fails, they escape the blame. The rational political move is to own the problem alone, claim the win, and hope the failure lands on somebody else's watch. Every government, before this one, has made that same calculation. Burnham has made the opposite one. He said, in effect, I'd rather solve this than own it. That's a rare instinct in any leader. In politics, it's almost unheard of. The willingness to subordinate the political win to the actual outcome and to invite challenge and scrutiny into the room rather than managing it from a distance. That's the leadership we've been talking about today. I don't agree with everything that Andy Burnham stands for, but on this, he has my full support. So that's your superhero of the week. That's it for this episode of Standing Apart. Thanks goes to Dr. James Walsh for the conversation. If you got something out of today's episode, the single best thing you can do is recommend it to someone who will find it useful. Grab their phone, with their permission of course, and search for Standing Apart in their favourite podcast app, and then hit subscribe. It takes 30 seconds, and it makes a genuine difference to how the show travels. I'll be back in a fortnight. Until then, keep standing apart. Standing Apart is a Sun Bear Consulting production.